Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the third webinar of the EFC Women in Football Partnership webinar series. Today, we're going to talk about inclusion for a competitive edge. I welcome Ebru Koksal from Women in Football. Good morning, Ebru.
Good morning, Gaia. It's a great pleasure for us to host another joint webinar and as part of our partnership. And good morning to all of our participants today. Thank you for joining. And wherever you are, I hope you're dealing with the heat in a decent way. So wonderful to see so many familiar names as well. And today we have a great expert, Chris Gibbons, who is going to talk to us about why inclusion is not just a DEI initiative, but how can you position it in your clubs as a competitive edge? Because we get asked a lot of the times about, okay, it's a great initiative, but how do we tie it to business outcomes? And that's the angle that we would love to take today. Back to you, Gaia, for further introductions.
Thank you, Ebru. Yeah, just a few logistical information. So first of all, this session is being recorded. If you have any ideas, any comments, or any question, you can please input it into the Q&A chat, Teams chat. You won't be allowed to open the camera and the microphone during the webinar. We will answer live to your question if you write it into the chat. Anyway, the recording, the presentation will be shared next week via email, and also the recording will be published on our EFC website as the past two sessions one already are there. So if you missed them, you can also recover it looking into it. So today's agenda, after this quick opening from me and Ebru, that as always, we will go quickly through our joint work. Then Chris Gibbons will give you a session on inclusion for a competitive edge. So I will shortly give you the word, Chris. So the partnership between EFC and Women in Football has been named Everyone's Game FC Club. So it's a network. And the aim of this network is essentially helping women working in European football to grow in their career path and to have access to leadership position. We have different activities going on. The first one is the series of webinar. We have 8 in the pipeline. This is the third one. Then we are organizing networking side events at EFC main events. So we did one at Club Connect, women's football, and we will do a big one during our General Assembly in Copenhagen, planned for 28th to 30th of September. And then we have the Women on Board program. And shortly I will show you the link to register for the 4th edition that is going to be delivered here in Nyon in August. The webinars, if you missed the past ones, we had one launching network with an interview to Ebru. Then we have a second one on authentic presence with an interview to Laura McAllister, UEFA Vice President. And today we have the masterclass on inclusion for a competitive edge. We will have a second part lately during the summer. And then in September, we will have a webinar on allyship. And then the side event as anticipated at the GA. Something that is running in parallel to Everyone's Game FC activities is a research project we have in cooperation with the University of Yun from Milano on barriers and drivers of leadership in football for women. So the background was qualitative research we carried out in the last 2 seasons with interviews with men and women working in leadership position in football. A workshop we organized last year at the General Assembly in Rome, and now a survey that we launched 1 month ago, more or less, and we are pushing and pushing and pushing. So I would really appreciate if you could take the time to fill it. It's just 15 minutes. It's aimed at both men and women. And if you could also share with your colleagues, it would be very, very much appreciated. So here it is, the QR code. Please scan it and fill the survey if you haven't done it so already. And finally, as anticipated, we are going to have the 4th edition of the Women on Board program from 18th to 20th in August here in person at Lyon. And we are also at the moment open for application to the 2nd edition of EFC Academy Management programs. These are both EFC campus programs. Here it is the QR code. If you are interested to join any one of these programs, please scan it and be in touch with my colleague Sarah Williams, and she will provide you all the relevant information. So that said, I give the word to Chris. It has his own presentation, and I invite him to start this masterclass on inclusion for a competitive edge.
Thank you so much, Gaia. Has the screen changed to my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Yes. Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. Yes, I hope you are all keeping as cool as you can. These are absolutely unprecedented times. I'm speaking to you this morning from North London, right next to the Emirates Stadium where Arsenal men and women play their games. So any of you that knows this part of North London will know there's a lot of concrete. So it's a very, very warm part of the world this morning. And I can only imagine that many of you are very warm as well. So we're going to keep this nice and relaxed and take it at a very gentle pace this morning. But I'm delighted to see so many people have joined us this morning for what is part 1 of a 2-part workshop around how we use inclusion for a competitive edge across football. By way of introduction, my name is Chris Gibbons. I'm an inclusion and anti-discrimination consultant, and I help sports organisations, governing bodies of sport, professional football clubs, different sports organisations. I also do some work outside of sport as well. And I help them think about what they can do to create cultures where everybody, whoever they are and wherever they come from, feels welcome, safe, valued and included. And when we become aware of discrimination, we recognize it, we address it, and hopefully stop it from happening again in the first place. And Ebru mentioned before that, you know, we hope that we want to do this because there is a moral imperative to make everybody feel included, but we also know it's good for business, and that includes the business of football. I used to work for the English Football Association, so I've got a good experience of working within governing bodies. And for 5 years, I was Chelsea Football Club's equality, diversity and inclusion consultant. So I think I've got a pretty good idea of some of the things we can do across the professional game and the grassroots game to create inclusive cultures and to ensure everybody can fulfill their potential. We're just going to be exploring some basics this morning. First of all, I'm going to talk to you about something that I like to call the microphone moment, that moment where somebody says to us, well, what is this work all about? What do we mean when we talk about equality, diversity and inclusion in clubs? And we don't expect you to be experts, but we do expect you to be confident to talk about why it matters to us. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit first of all. It does come back to the point as well about, well, what is the point of this work? Why bother doing this work? And we know that there is a competitive edge for football clubs, and we're just going to unpick that in a bit more detail. And finally, I'm going to introduce you to what I refer to as my inclusion building blocks for sports organisations, which should hopefully be your next steps for in building an inclusive club culture. Now, with this, we're going to be going through quite a lot of information today, but do not worry. I'm very happy to provide a summary of the slide deck after the session. So please don't feel that you need to frantically write everything down. We will make sure that the information gets to you after the session. This is very much a starter for 10. Some of you will have explored some of these issues before. For some of you, this will be the first time you've really had the opportunity to consider what is absolutely central to the football industry across the world. So yeah, whatever your confidence so far, I really hope you enjoy the session. So let's kick things off by talking about what I refer to as the microphone moment. Now, I was watching Sky Sports News at the end of last year, and I was watching an article about the fact that they had given the Manchester City player, well, he's currently on loan at Everton, I'm sure you're aware, Jack Grealish, the Kick It Out Award for Equality and Inclusion. For those of you who don't know, Kick It Out is football's anti-discrimination organisation. They used to be football's anti-racism organisation, but they work across all different areas of discrimination in the UK and beyond. And I was watching this article and I was really delighted to see that Jack had been given this award. And you can see him here with the Kick It Out chief exec, Samuel Okafor, and the Sky Sports presenter, where he was being given the award. And Jack was asked what this award meant to him. He had that very literal microphone moment. And what I was really impressed by was the simple response that Jack gave. Some of you might know that Jack has a little sister who has cerebral palsy. And because of that, Jack has always been very alive to issues of diversity, issues of inclusion, and issues of discrimination. So he said quite simply, I've got a sister who's got cerebral palsy, so this really matters to me. I know why it's important to everybody. And I loved the fact that he kept it simple, because we know that some people find the issues of equality, diversity, and inclusion intimidating, quite confusing, and it puts them off wanting to think about how they can build it into their ecosystems. So I want to spend a little bit of time with you today thinking about that microphone moment. You are all representatives of clubs who are committed to creating an equitable, diverse, and inclusive culture. And like I said before, we don't expect you to be experts, but we do want to get you to a place where you are confident to talk about why this matters to you. So we're going to kick things off by having a conversation about inclusion. Now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ejam, who's going to do a very brief poll. And we have one question that we want to ask all of you. And that question is this: in general, how confident do you feel to talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion at your club? And we're just going to ask you very simply on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 meaning I wouldn't be at all confident to talk about it at my club. And it's absolutely fine to recognize that. Through to 5, I talk about this all day, every day. I'm confident that I have the language. I'm confident to talk about why this matters to us. So, Ejam, are you able to help us out with our poll for our attendees today?
So, Chris, the average is 3.5.
Oh, great. Well, we've had a lot of responses come through already. Fantastic. So a 3.5. How many responses we had there, Gaia? Can you see?
So we had 30 so far.
30.
So we have less than half of people. So if you haven't replied yet, please do.
This is essentially,
yeah, you have 21% at 5, 34% at 4, 31% at 3, and 6% each at 1 and 2.
Okay, and I'm equally delighted to hear people saying they're really confident, as are those of you who say I'm not confident to talk about this at all. Hopefully, that's one of the reasons you're here today. We want to move you from a 1 or a 2 to a 3, a 4, or a 5. Well, thank you very much for that. I think it's really important to recognize as well, there is no end point to our journey on learning about equality, diversity, and inclusion. I've been working in the EDI space for over 20 years, and I am learning all day, every day, from the individuals that I work with, from the governing bodies of sport that I work with, and the football clubs that I work with. So there is no end point to our learning journey. Even if we're at a 5, we've got to think about how do we always keep ourselves at a 5. But thank you very much for your quick participation in that quick poll. So the first thing I'd like you to think about, and maybe if you just want to get a pen and a piece of paper, or if you want to drop it into the chat, I want you to think about how you would respond if somebody asked you in a simple sentence to define what diversity means at your football club. Now, I've spent a lot of my career having the huge privilege of going into Premier League football academies and working with boys and girls, young men and young women. And when we ask young people this question, they give us word perfect responses because they see diversity around them all the time. They learn about this stuff at school. As a 46-year-old man, I think I've got a pretty good understanding of diversity, but I certainly didn't learn about it in a positive way when I was young. So I don't necessarily have the language to define it easily. So I just want to give you a few seconds to think about it. If you were asked by one of your colleagues, a a footballer, a parent or a carer, somebody from your wider community. Well, why, what's all this diversity stuff about that we're doing at our club? How would you define what diversity means to you? I'll give you a few seconds, and then I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts on it. And the key to this is really keeping it as simple as you can, because the longer we make our definitions, the easier it is to lose people and the easier it is to for people to get confused. So let me share with you what I've put, and we'll see if it comes close to some of your definitions. So I tend to talk about diversity as meaning that we're just recognizing the fact that we are all different. We've all had different upbringings. We've all had different life experiences, positive and negative. We will all see the world in different ways. And because we are all different, we will all bring, hopefully, very different skill sets. That's really important to the world of work in football. And equally importantly, because we are all different, at times we will have different needs as well. Diversity is fundamentally recognizing the fact that all of us are different. And when I talk about diversity, I like to relate it back to something which I'm sure you're all very aware of. I would love to be sat on an iceberg today with this heat, something we call the iceberg concept. And for those of you who don't know, the iceberg concept fundamentally says that only about 10% of an iceberg is visible and above the surface. The bulk of it, about 90% of it, is invisible and beneath the surface. And I think the way that we talk about diversity should reflect that. We can make assumptions about people's diversity when we see them. I assume that you can see me on your screen right now. So you will be making assumptions about my gender, about my age bracket. I've already told you my age, so you probably know that one, about my ethnic background, for example. But most of my diversity, most of what makes me me, is invisible and beneath the surface. You can't necessarily tell anything about my sexual orientation just by looking at me. I have 3 hidden impairments, and you can't tell any of those just by looking at me. So what we are asking football clubs to do is to create a culture whereby, if I want to talk about those invisible bits of my diversity, if I choose to do so, if I feel it is safe to do so, then I can talk about them, I can bring them to the surface without fear of discrimination, persecution, or isolation as a result. That's what we're asking when it comes to diversity, creating that culture where I can talk about my identity. And we recognize that across different countries, we have various pieces of legislation that protect certain identities from discrimination. In the UK, we have something called the Equality Act, which protects people from discrimination on the grounds of 9 different identities. But we need to remember that identity means something different to every single one of us. In the world of work, it might mean things like my leadership skills, my thinking styles, my decision making up at the top there, whether I'm an introvert or an extrovert. Over on the right-hand side there, height, a very important one for me. You probably can't see, but I'm a very short man, so my sense of my height is very central to my diversity. I recently added caring responsibilities to this one because I have quite complex caring responsibilities now for my father, who's a wheelchair user. And I got married last year to my partner, Mark, so I've put marital status up at the top there as well. Otherwise, I'll be in trouble. So we need to remember that diversity means something different to us, to all of us, and that diversity is always changing. So if diversity means recognizing the fact that we are all different, I imagine you all got that one right. I think it gets a little bit trickier from here on in. How would we define what equality means to us at our clubs? I'll give you some time again to maybe write down a simple sentence for how you would define what equality means to you at your club. And the reason, while you're writing that down, the reason I think it's very important to think about this one, because I think it's very easy to misexplain or to explain inaccurately what we mean by equality and sometimes what we don't mean by equality. So I'll give you a few more seconds to think about how you would explain, how you would define what equality means to your club. Okay, let me share with you my definition of equality. For me, equality is about making sure that everybody has equal access to an opportunity. And we need to remember that just saying that in itself is not enough. Like I said at the beginning, I spent 5 years working as a Chelsea Football Club's equality, diversity and inclusion consultant. And Chelsea has always been super proud to talk about being a club for all, where everybody has equal access to opportunities. However, I think we are all aware that, for example, when Chelsea are playing Tottenham Hotspur at home on a Saturday afternoon, a lot of Jewish supporters will not come to Stamford Bridge because we know, frustratingly, there is a higher prevalence of anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish behaviour at that game. We still know in 2026, and I say this personally with a very heavy heart, that a lot of our gay fans will not come to Stamford Bridge for fear of homophobia. And if they do come to Stamford Bridge, they probably won't bring their partner. But if they realize one day they want to have the courage to bring their partner, they probably still won't hold their hand. Because we know that, yeah, like I said, with a very heavy heart, that in 2026, homophobia is still an issue, not just in football, but in wider sport and in wider society. So just saying that everybody has equal access in itself is not enough. We need to think about what we do to create that culture where everybody has equal access. I think it's equally important to remember what equality doesn't mean. And I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of saying that equality means treating everybody the same way. But I think it's very important to remember that it doesn't mean that. And I'm going to show you why. I'm sure all of you have seen this imagery before. I think this imagery is super simple, but super helpful when we're talking about equality and diversity. If we treat everybody the same way, they won't all get equal access to an opportunity. There's little me on the right-hand side. This is basically my life story we're sharing today. So what we do is we recognize the fact that everybody is different, and we put different things in place so that everybody has equal access to opportunities. It's something we refer to as equity. So when you hear clubs, when you hear governing bodies of football talking about equity, it's those different things we put in place, not so that everybody necessarily gets the same access to our sport, but everybody gets equal access to our sport. And I've just got one example of equity in action that I wanted to share with you. Visually impaired, VI football, for blind and visually impaired people. We're putting something different in place so that visually impaired and blind people get access to the game. You will know, for example, that, that they may wear an eye covering. There will be a bell inside the ball so that they can hear the ball. There will be different messages and commands that are given on the pitch. So it's not the same access to the game, it's equal access to the game so that everybody has equal, not the same access to an opportunity. So when at your club you're thinking about those different things you put in place, you are thinking of examples of equity in action. But I think in 2026 and beyond, more than anything else across football, you will hear us talking about inclusion and creating an inclusive culture across the game. And I'm going to give you just a few seconds to think about how you might define inclusion as opposed to equality or equity. For me, it's about going one step above and beyond the concept of equality and equity. Take a few seconds to think about how you might define inclusion or creating an inclusive culture at your club. Okay, let me share a few of my thoughts. I've got a few different definitions of inclusion that I'd like to share with you today. The first one is about moving from recognizing difference to valuing difference. Difference isn't just interesting, but it's important for everything we do on and off the pitch. Ebru mentioned that competitive edge. Difference is good for our competitive edge, and we'll look at some examples of that in just a minute. Second of all, it's about recognizing that because we are all different, at times some of us might experience barriers to participation. So it means we all have a responsibility to think about what we do, not only to recognize those barriers, but to remove the barriers when we become aware of them, and hopefully to create a culture where those barriers do not exist in the future. And third of all, it's about making everybody feel that they belong. And again, this is something that's really easy to say, that we want to make everybody feel that they belong. But it can be quite difficult to measure a feeling. We can measure difference. We can measure diversity. I'll talk a little bit about data later on, but we can go out and we can collect diversity data about participants, about their age, about their sex, about their sexual orientation, about their ethnic background. We can do that in quite straightforward ways. But how you measure a feeling, it's not impossible, but it can be quite difficult. And I'm going to share some examples of that in just a minute. So Here is little Chris Gibbons getting his 2 boxes to stand on so he can enjoy the game. But what we are asking everybody to do across football is to take a step back. And however you contribute to our clubs, whether that is through policies, programs, competitions, initiatives, HR, finance, whatever it is that you do for football, it's about taking a step back and creating a culture where everybody is on a level playing field and nobody feels that there will be barriers because of their identity or because of perceptions about their identity to be able to participate and fulfill their potential. That's what this work is all about, removing the barriers so that everybody feels equal, they feel that they belong. Now, I've got an example of this that I want to share with you, and it always gives me great pride to put an image of the legendary Lionesses up on our screen. You will all be very aware that the wonderful Lionesses won the Women's Euros in 2022, but not only that, we know they had that back-to-back victory and they went and won again in 2025. Now, this is a basic game of something called Spot the Difference. I want you to ask yourselves what one of the quite significant but basic differences is between these two images and why you think it might be relevant to our conversation about equality and inclusion. I'll give you a clue. It has nothing to do with the banner that is above the Lionesses. Take a few seconds. It is staring you right in the face. You do not need to be an expert on football, an expert on women's football to see this difference. Take a second to think about it, and then we'll see if you've got the same idea as me. I'm absolutely sure there'll be some people on the session who are dying to shout out that they know what it is. Well, I'll put you out of your misery. You will see that in 2022, the Lionesses were wearing white shorts, and in 2025, they were wearing dark blue shorts. And we all know that female athletes have said for many years now that they are sick and tired of having to wear white kit because when they are on their periods, blood can show through and that can make them feel less welcome, less included and less valued. So after the 2022 Euros, the Lionesses went to the English FA and said that they didn't want to wear white shorts anymore. They wanted to move to wearing blue shorts. And I'm delighted to tell you that the FA did not kick up any fuss about that. And they very quickly moved to wearing blue shorts. And for me, this is the distinction between equality and inclusion. Equality is providing an opportunity for people to participate. Inclusion is considering what we do when people do participate to make sure that that is a high quality and positive experience. So inclusion is about the feeling that we get when we put equality in place. Can you see the distinction that we're making? Equality is taking part. Inclusion is having a wonderful, positive experience when we do take part. And that's what our inclusion work is all about. We've seen this a lot across not just English football, but across international football and international sport. And this was something that they introduced, these dark shorts. They introduced this to West Bromwich women's team back in 2022. And I was really interested in the time at what their head coach, Jenny Sugarman, had to say about that move. And this is what she said. She said, it's our job of staff to find every percentage point we can to support our players to perform at their best. I'm proud the club have supported the decision to switch to navy shorts for our female players. It's another sign of the continued integration of the women's team across the club and recognition of a progressive and inclusive culture. So for Jenny, it was all about inclusion and progression. But I really like the fact that she talked about finding those percentage points for everybody to perform at their best. We all talk all day, every day in sport about marginal gains. And it's not just the training that we do. It's not just the tactics that we put in place, but it's those other things we do as well to make sure that everybody feels included and that they can fulfill their potential on and off the pitch. I thought that was a really, really wonderful example of inclusion in action. And I've spent a lot of time over the last few years having the great privilege of working with some of our World Cup host cities and traveling across North America and talking to different clubs about what they're doing to create inclusive cultures. And I was at an MLS game at the Seattle Sounders Stadium 2 years ago during Ramadan. And I was super impressed to see that they took a break in the action so that not just their players, but also their spectators could observe Ramadan. And so they were making it clear we don't just want to be a tolerant place of our Muslim community, whether that's in the stands or on the pitch, but we want to make sure that we recognize their diversity and we put something in place so that they feel welcome, safe, valued and included when they are in our stadium. I thought that was another example of inclusion in action. Just a very, very small thing that can have a huge impact on people's sense of belonging. Well, I hope you found that interesting. I hope that's kind of made you feel, okay, well, yeah, this is something I'm confident about. Maybe we've moved from 1s and 2s to 3s and 4s and 5s on our scale. And as you go away from today's session, ask yourself how you would define those key principles, but also keep a lookout for how other organizations and other brands and other businesses talk about it too. I'm a bit of a Lego fan myself. I'm sure there's a few other Lego fans on the session today. And those of you who are Lego fans will no doubt know this set of characters called Everyone is Awesome. Lego brought them out a few years ago to show their solidarity with the LGBT community. My godson very kindly bought me this set of characters to show his solidarity with his gay Uncle Chris. What he didn't know is that one of my 3 impairments is that I'm colorblind. So I found this very, very difficult to build, but I did eventually get it built. And I was particularly interested in the promotional materials that came in the pack with those figures because it outlined Lego's commitment to diversity. And this is what they said. They said, we at Lego define diversity as the visible and invisible dimensions of human uniqueness. I love that bit about uniqueness because we are real unique. Diversity is a fact. We are all different. Inclusion is what we do. So there are things we can do in the longer term to think about how we create diverse and representative communities at our clubs. But we all have an imperative all day, every day to think about everybody who is a part of our football world. What do we do to make sure that whoever they are and wherever they come from, they feel welcome, safe, valued and included? That's what this inclusion work is all about. And before we move on, I think it's very important that I remind you that whilst these are clearly interlinking concepts, diversity and inclusion, they fit together, they are not one and the same thing. An example from my professional life, for many years, I was what we call in the UK, a school governor. So I sat on the board of directors as a volunteer at a primary school, a school for 4-year-olds to 11-year-olds, where I live next door to the Arsenal Stadium. At our school, we have 350 children. That we know of, there are 35 different community languages spoken in our schools. 65% of our girls come from a Somali Muslim heritage, and we celebrate that diversity every day at our school. However, we did a piece of work where we asked the children to tell us how included and how valued they felt in school. And that was a real eye-opener for us. Those Somali Muslim girls said, well, at playtime, we just play together because nobody else seems to want to play with us. Boys who were from Eritrea, because we have a large Eritrean community where I live, said, well, we've talked about countries of the world in class, but we've never talked about Eritrea. So we just feel that no one really cares. And we needed to listen because we could not assume that just because we had a diverse school community, that meant it was an inclusive school community. Like Lego said, inclusion is what we do. So we've all got to think individually and collectively about what we do to create that inclusive culture where everybody feels welcome, safe, valued and included and can fulfill their potential free from fear of discrimination. So I've got some questions that I'd like you to consider after today's session, and I will make sure that these are included in the slide deck as they come back to you. Thinking about your club, what does diversity look like at your club? And I very deliberately used the word look there, but we know that diversity is more than skin deep. So it may be those invisible parts of our diversity as well. What do you know about diversity at your club? Can you think of any examples of equity, things you've put in place so that different people get equal access to opportunities on and off the pitch? And do you think everybody feels included all the time? And how do you know? At my school, we thought everybody felt included until we asked the question, and then we realized that it wasn't really the case. So those are 3 questions that I want you to take back to your club, talk to your colleagues, talk to your senior leaders, and ask yourselves, what do we know about diversity? Are we putting equity in place? And how are we confident that we have an inclusive culture for everybody who is proud to represent our club, whether that's as a spectator, a fan, a player, wider community, member of staff, whoever it might be? So hopefully you're a little bit more interested now. You've got that confidence. You want to talk about this stuff, but you need to be able to sell the benefits of a diverse and inclusive football culture. Well, let me share with you some of my thoughts about that. First of all, this is about sending a strong, consistent, robust, clear, unapologetic, I love all these adjectives, message that football is welcoming for everybody, that our club is welcoming for all. But we can't assume that just because we feel that's the case, that everybody knows that's the case. I invite all of you to think about your communications, your messaging, your programs, your policies. Are we making it clear in everything we do? Are we always banging the drum to make it clear that we are a club for all, so that that message is always getting to everybody? A lot of this is about people, about acquiring talent and holding on to talent. All the research shows that inclusive employers, they can cast their net much more widely in terms of the talent pool, and they're likely to hold on to staff for much longer. In 2022, the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, did some research around inclusion at work, and this is what they found. They found the importance of inclusion and diversity in the workforce can be underestimated, but research into the field continually reveals that a high level of adoption is associated not only with greater productivity and performance, but innovation, talent attraction, employee retention, and overall workforce well-being. There is lots and lots of other research out there to back that up, that when we're making it clear we are a club for all, when we are recruiting, many, many more people will want to throw their hat in the ring and say, I'd like to go for that job, rather than thinking, I've heard about that club, I'd love to work there, but people like me would not be welcomed there. So in terms of talent acquisition and retention, it can be hugely powerful. I think sometimes we shy away from talking about the commercial and the financial imperatives for diversity and inclusion as well. And we know it can have a very positive effect on the bottom line, our finances and our income. There was a big piece of research carried out in the US about the financial impact of Title IX. For those of you who don't know, Title IX is a piece of legislation that means that if you get any federal funding in the US for education, you must tackle sex-based discrimination through it. It's called Title IX. And they did a really interesting piece of research. They said within that the rise in women's sports demonstrates how expanding access and opportunity creates not just fairness, but also flourishing markets. What started as a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative, that's Title IX, it became the catalyst for the exponential growth of the women's sports industry, which is projected to reach 2.35 billion in global revenues by 2030. I work with a lot of women's clubs, particularly in North America, and they are not only looking at the moral imperative, the social justice work that they do around making sure that women can fulfill their potential on and off the pitch, but they know there are great markets there that they can be tapping into as well. So we cannot ignore the financial imperative for diversity and inclusion. I've mentioned a few times that I live right next door to the Arsenal Stadium in North London, and this is a mural that was on the corner of my street last year, where Arsenal women went into a commercial partnership with a laundry detergent called Persil. And I thought this was great because they used that inclusion imperative to talk about their products. So they talked about periods and how if female players are on their period, don't worry, because Persil will clean their shorts. I think that was a really wonderful crossover between our commercial and corporate effectiveness and our commitment to inclusion. Really, really wonderful. And we're seeing this time and time again across football. Let's think about how we market. Let's think about those commercial imperatives, but let's make sure it's underpinned by our commitment to inclusion as well. We know we all work in football, right? And we know that we live and die by our reputation. And we also know that it's often those bad news stories that stick. I've always been super proud to talk about working on equality, diversity, inclusion in football. And people often say to me, good luck with that, Chris. And that's so frustrating for me because we are all doing wonderful work to champion the women's game. We are all doing wonderful work to make sure that LGBT people are not discriminated against. We are all doing wonderful work to tackle anti-Semitism and racism. But it'll be the bad news stories about your club that people hook onto. Those become your reputation rather than the good work that you are doing. And part of this is absolutely about authenticity. It is not a lot to ask that everybody can come to work, can come to our stadia and feel that they can be their authentic self, that they shouldn't have to lie about who they are, pretend to be somebody that they're not. When I went to interview for the English FA back in 2013, one of the questions I asked, because I've always been very open about being gay, is whether it would be okay to come and work at the FA and be authentic about who I am, not feel that I need to lie about who I am. And the panel who interviewed me said, at the FA, we are proud to be a diverse and inclusive employer. If you ever experience discrimination, let us know about it and we will deal with it. And that mattered to me because I wanted to feel that I can go and work for an organization where I don't have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not, where I can talk about my partner, my husband, in the same way that everybody else can talk about their families without fear of discrimination or isolation. The authenticity piece cannot be underestimated. And Harvard Business School did a piece of work on the impacts of this back in 2019. They said that they estimate a positive correlation between employee well-being and productivity, and there is a growing evidence base documenting this being a causal effect, so a direct impact. Recent experimental evidence suggests that a meaningful increase in well-being yields, on average, an increase in productivity of about 10%. So if I can be my authentic self at work, I'm probably going to be happier to come to work in the morning, having that energy to get stuck into my work. And that's going to have an impact on my potential, and it's going to have an impact on productivity, and that's going to have an impact on the business. So it's not just about me, but it's about what we are delivering for football as well. I think we are all very familiar with a term which in English, and I'm sure you've got lots of similarities in lots of European languages, of great minds think alike. I'm not a massive fan of that phrase. I much prefer this one, great minds don't think alike. And it's only when we invite different ideas, perspectives, experiences into our decision making that we know it can be good for business. If we have people sat around our decision-making tables who look the same, sound the same, have the same experiences, it's not necessarily going to mean we make the most informed decisions. We're not going to be thinking about the diversity of our stakeholders. And again, there is research to back this up. McKinsey, who I'm sure many of you know, do a lot of work around inclusion and well-being within lots of different industries, did some work on this in 2023. And that work found that companies which have a gender diverse executive team have a 39% higher likelihood of financial outperformance. And the same stat again for ethnically diverse leadership teams, a 39% higher likelihood of outperformance. So when we have diverse people making our decisions, it's better for our decision making. We're throwing more ideas into the mix. We're being more critical about ourselves and how we get to the decisions that we do. So we should be confident that we're making better informed decisions. Some of you will remember a lot of conversations about this as well after the 2008 financial crisis. And Harvard Business School, again, has done some research around its analysis of 95 large US banks after the crash. And one of the things that found was that having board members with different opinions who are willing to challenge the groupthink mentality, so all thinking the same way, can also reduce risk. Some of you might remember that one of the criticisms that came out of the financial crash was that not enough women were involved in decision making. So we need to make sure there is diversity of thought, identity and experience around those decision making tables so we can be as confident as possible that we're making the best informed decisions. We also have a legal responsibility, and that legal responsibility will look different in every EU country. But it's important to remember that we don't do this because the law tells us we should do it. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and we know that it's going to be good for the individual, and we know it's going to be good for our club, and we know it's going to be good for the wider football industry. So if I want you to take one tip away from this first part of the session, it would be this. Remember that across football, we all have a professional responsibility individually and collectively to consider what we do, to talk confidently about what equality, diversity means to us, our club, and the wider game. And that professional responsibility is regardless of our personal beliefs, our personal values, and our personal opinions. We are a diverse group of people. That is something we celebrate. And we will all see the world in very different ways. We will, for example, have different views on LGBT equality. We are all entitled to those different views. We will all have different views, for example, on different religions, beliefs, and faiths. We are all entitled to those views. But when we are representing our club and when we are representing football, we are all signing up to a shared set of behaviours and a shared set of values. And that isn't to say that we're not entitled to our opinions, but every single one of us, and that refers to all of us without exception, has to leave some of our personal beliefs, some of our personal values, and some of our personal biases at the doors when we come to work, when we're representing our club. It can be difficult, but we've all got to think about how we do that. Like I said, it's not that we're not entitled to our views, but where and when it might be okay to express those. And that might include on social media, for example, is something that all of us has to think about when we're representing the game that we are all passionate about, the game that we all love. So we've given you a little bit of a taster of what we mean when we talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion. We've given you some of the benefits of E, D, and I. So you'll be thinking, well, how do we go about doing this then? Well, just for the rest of the session, I'm going to share with you what I refer to as my building blocks of an inclusive football club. And that's why it's really important, I think, that I give you this slide deck afterwards so that you've got these to refer back to. I talk about the 5 building blocks of inclusive football. And the first, whilst they're not in any particular order, I would argue that this one absolutely always needs to come first. It's about a visible and proactive leadership. All of our EDI work starts with leadership. Leadership takes accountability for, even if it is not doing, all of our equality, diversity, and inclusion work. So, for our leaders, for example, that may mean things like getting confident to talk about inclusion and why it matters to our clubs and to football. We need to give our leaders that microphone moment as well, because if they don't know how to talk about E, D, and I, then how can we ever be expected to be confident and to have the permission to talk about equality, diversity, and inclusion? As we just discussed, those leaders need to make sure that they are including diverse voices and perspectives in their decision making. If our leaders are always going to the same people who they know are going to agree with them, who are going to pat them on the shoulder and say that's a great idea, it's not going to be good for our decision making. We talk about something called disruption, and we use it in a very positive way because our leaders need to think about how they bring different people in who are disruptive, who are critical friends, who will check and challenge us on what we're doing. It may well be that they still take the same decision, but they want to be confident that they've really scrutinized it with a diverse group of voices and experiences before they do so. Our leaders, and remember that leadership can take many different forms. It's not necessarily our executives, committees and boards. It can be, team leaders, managers. It's our leaders on the pitch. It's the leaders in our fan groups. It's about role modeling. They set the standard that we expect of everybody else. And if they are not doing that themselves, then how can they expect everybody else to want to do it? It starts with the leadership. They've got to demonstrate it through that role modeling and standard setting. Our leaders should be asking critical questions. And leaders, when we go to tell leaders about our EDI work and they nod along and say, that's great, carry on, that's frustrating. Our leaders should be saying, well, why have we decided to do that? Who will it be relevant to? How will we measure the impact and how will we celebrate it? If our leaders are not checking and challenging, then they are not being proactive in terms of their EDI leadership. Really importantly, our leaders have got to get confident to call out unacceptable behaviour from their peers, from other people across our football ecosystem. Because again, if they're not calling it out, if they're not making it clear what's acceptable and unacceptable, then how can they expect any of the rest of us working in football to do that? We need our leaders to take that zero tolerance approach to all forms of discriminatory behaviour on and off the pitch, however it happens, whoever it impacts on. And finally, our leaders have got to give us the space, the oxygen, the permission to celebrate our successes. We want to shout about our EDI successes from the rooftops, and our leaders have got to make sure that that happens. They take the accountability for the challenges and the successes, and they need to shout about the successes too. So our first building block is visible and proactive leadership. A few examples of that in action. One of my favorite people in the world, Emma Hayes. I used to work with Emma when I was at Chelsea. Huge privilege to work with Emma. You'll know she's now the head coach of the US women's national soccer team. I thought it was great when she said the Women's Super League is just the same level as the Premier League. Just because we're women, it doesn't mean we shouldn't be afforded the same access. I love it when our leaders are just unapologetic about why equality, diversity, and inclusion matter. And this is one of many, many quotes I could attribute to Emma, where she's talked about how we need to be unapologetic about our commitment to that level playing field. And similarly, Gareth Southgate, you may well know that he's been very, very outspoken in the last few years about diversity, equality, inclusion, and well-being. And one of the things that he said was that he has a responsibility to the wider community to use his voice, and so do the players. It's their duty to continue to interact with the public on matters such as equality, inclusivity, and racial justice, while using the power of their voices to help put debates on the table, raise awareness, and educate. I'm so delighted, and I'm sure you are as well, to see our football leaders being confident to talk about why this matters. So we've got a responsibility to go back to our clubs and sell this to our leaders and say, you need to be a part of this, and you need to be leading our work, and you've got to get confident to talk about this. So it starts with the visible and proactive leadership. The second of the building blocks is how we use data and insights to inform what we do. And I'm just going to break this down because I think it's important to make the distinction between the two. Data means understanding what diversity does and diversity doesn't look like across our club ecosystem. It's about understanding how representative our club is or isn't of our wider communities. And we also use data in the longer term to determine whether change is happening. It's only when we get data regularly that we can recognize whether we are shifting the dial. So the data is the quantitative, struggle to say that, part of the work that we do. Insights are about what people's experiences are, how it feels to take part or to not take part. We don't only ask people who are participating how they feel, we need to go to the people who are not and ask them why and how it feels to not be able to participate. And it also helps us to recognize what those barriers are that might exist to participation. So data is quantitative and insights are qualitative. And there are various ways that we will collect data and insights, and we can always talk about this more on another day. But data we would get through asking people to fill in surveys. It's something in the UK that we call equality monitoring. We ask people to share anonymously and confidentially information about their diversity so that we understand what representation does and doesn't look like. And insights are through conversations. We need to sit down with people and ask them how it feels to participate or to not participate. We can also do that through surveys. But insights, we really get those rich experiences through the conversations that we have with people about participation. The third of our building blocks is about inclusive policies and processes. Now, lots of people think that policies are dead boring, but policies are dead important. And I love talking about policies, and I love get stuck into policies. Our policies are all about our people, how what it is like when you are representing our club as an employee, as a board member, as a spectator, a fan, a season ticket holder, as a member of our wider community. These policies speak to our people, and they set the standards that apply to everybody equally across our club ecosystem. They make it clear what behaviors are acceptable and unacceptable for everybody. And they make it clear what our actions will be, not only to challenge unacceptable behavior, but hopefully to put things in place to stop the unacceptable behavior from happening in the first place. But critically, they also make it clear how I, as a club representative, am supported as well. It's not just about telling me what I must or must not do. It's about supporting and protecting me too. A few examples of the policies that we would invite you to either put in place or review if you do have in place is your equality policy, that makes it clear about our commitment to equal opportunities for everybody. Our recruitment policy, how we ensure that we are recruiting with inclusion in line. Parental leave, are we thinking about how that might apply to anybody across our workforce, whatever their family circumstances and whatever their sex? Flexible working, how do we want to make sure we adapt to ever more diverse workforces and ever more diverse ways of working? Are we explicit about all the different forms of bullying and harassment and how we will recognise and deal with them? And equally, are we making it clear in our policies how people can report discrimination or unacceptable behaviour if they witness or experience it? If we do not enshrine this in policies, then it's very difficult for us to take recourse when things do go wrong. And we need to review our policies on a regular basis because the world changes, the language changes, communities change. And part of our good governance is reviewing our policies on a regular basis. The fourth of our 5 building blocks is ongoing learning and awareness raising. I would love to think that I can give you all the answers by the top of the hour today. I'm very sorry to let you know that will not happen. And we all have an individual and collective responsibility to continually educate ourselves and each other on the world of EDI, because the way I talked about EDI 5 years ago might be different from how I talk about it now, and I guarantee it will be different from how I talk about it in another 5 years' time. So think about all the formal and informal ways that you might educate yourselves and each other. We might go to, face-to-face conferences and workshops where we learn about issues relating to inclusion. We can all jump online and do a little bit of e-learning from time to time. E-learning won't give us all the answers, but it'll at least put us all on a level playing field so we know the fundamentals. And one-to-ones, if you are a manager, think about when you're having your one-to-ones with team members. Are you asking them about how confident they are to talk about EDI and what learning and awareness raising they might need to be able to talk confidently about it? Team meetings as well, make sure when we're getting our teams and departments together, we're thinking about how we talk about E, D, and I. And I'm a big fan, I'm sure a lot of us are a big fan of podcasts. There are some great podcasts out there where talking about the world of sport, the world of business in sport, and the world of inclusion and business in sport. So get stuck into those podcasts, which are an informal way to learn, but they will just keep it ticking over in our minds. And streaming as well. There is a load of really, really wonderful streaming content available on the world of sport, on the world of inclusion, injustice, social injustice, discrimination. So I reckon there's not really any excuse for us all personally for just keeping ourselves up to speed on different issues to do with equality, diversity and inclusion. But just remember, and I said this at the beginning, there is no endpoint to our learning journey. Our fifth and final building block that I want to share with you today is this. It's how we communicate and celebrate our inclusion work. There is no point in doing all of this wonderful work if we don't feel confident to shout about it from the rooftops. I do know that some businesses, some football clubs, for example, might be nervous about talking about some areas of their work because they're nervous about how it might be perceived by some communities. I remember one club I was working with a few years ago who were doing some work around LGBT inclusion, and they wanted to put something out on their socials, and they were worried about how those messages might be perceived in some areas of the world where it might be unacceptable or unlawful to be lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender. So we had a conversation with the director of communications at the club, and the conversation was about, well, do we filter it to just some parts of the world? And the director of communications say no, because when we celebrate our work, we celebrate it to everybody. And if for some people that's uncomfortable, then maybe we're not the right club for them, but we don't apologize, nor do we shy away from talking about how we want to be a club for all. So first of all, there will be the things that we might do through our internal communications. And I always say that our communications about equality, diversity and inclusion need to start with how we talk about it internally for our workforce and for our senior leaders and for our boards of directors. So think about how we update staff on the things that we are doing, because critically, everybody needs to know about what we're doing, and it might give them the opportunity to get involved as well. Think about how we use our team meetings to not only update people on what we're doing, but to invite them to suggest how we might want to do things. Again, those diverse perspectives that people will have in our teams, and they will be able to make invaluable contributions to how we talk about this work. The third one, if you have one, your intranet, when your teams are logging on in the morning, make sure that they are aware of all of the, those business imperatives, those meetings that they've got to go to, but the things that we've got coming up around equality, diversity, and inclusion. If you are doing something to celebrate disabled people's participation in football, then make sure you are signposting that, but also make sure that your teams know where to get more information about what we're doing, why we're doing it, the language that we might use around disability. So think about how we use those internal platforms such as intranets to make sure that everybody is aware of what we're doing. And you might host something that we often refer to as town halls. So town halls might be when the senior leadership team of the club get all of the staff together to update in person on what we're doing. It can be a little bit of a social as well, but it gives you the opportunity to ask questions to leadership. And those are so important, because not only do we want leadership to check and challenge what we're doing on EDI, but we want to check and challenge the leadership on what they are doing on EDI as well. So it's got to be a two-way street. So the internal communications are critically important. The way that we talk about this externally is really important as well. And I wanted to share a few examples with you. The FA of Wales put out their 2021 to 2026 Equality, Diversity and Inclusion strategy a few years ago. They put it out into the public domain. And I thought that the way that they did it was so wonderful, because they really thought about how they make it high vis, high energy, high impact. They made it exciting to look at, because let's be honest, not everybody's going to get excited by an equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. And I don't think the outside world necessarily wants to see an Excel spreadsheet of actions. They want to see something that is high energy, that will engage them. They had this, I can send you a link to this afterwards. They got a wonderful, outline of all of the contents, what their objectives are as a governing body: education, equality, reporting and listening, how they will take accountability, how they will monitor their strategy, making it clear, putting that commitment out there in the public domain. Then they go through those objectives one by one. They break these down into more detail, and they share some of the examples of the deliverables, what they will do under each of those objectives to meet that commitment. So I thought that the FA of Wales has done a really lovely job there. And I'm always really, really intrigued to see the things that other football clubs, other soccer clubs are doing as well. I worked for a few years with Chicago Fire, one of the big MLS clubs in the United States. And one of the things that they did a few years ago is just, you can see it at the top of the banner there. They put the rainbow flag into their banner. And it's not necessarily all that big, but it is on the front page of their website. And if you clicked on the banner, then it would tell you about why that mattered to them and the work they were doing across their club to create a diverse and inclusive culture for everybody, including LGBT people. And I don't think I'm wrong when I say that that was quite a brave thing for them to do, for them to put it up front and center on the homepage of their website. Your website is a window for the outside world to see what your values are, what your culture is, whether people like me will be welcome, safe, valued, and included. So all credit to them for doing what I don't think is incorrect to say is quite a brave thing, especially in the very turbulent times we live in when it comes to identity. Got to come back to Lego, because let's just think about all those really interesting and creative ways that we talk about what we do. And Lego's done some really, really lovely work on their website. Do go and check it out. They've just used their, diverse Lego figures to talk about diversity and to talk about how they're creating a diverse and inclusive workplace. Let's make this stuff exciting as well. This stuff doesn't have to be dry. It certainly shouldn't be dry, and it should never, ever be boring. So let's think about how we really draw people in so that they want to be a part of this work as well. You can see how they outline on the website all of their priorities and commitments around equality, diversity and inclusion. So if you're going to do the work, you've got to get confident to talk about it as well. What's the point in doing it if we're not telling people what we're doing, why, how, and really importantly, how it will be relevant to them? So I've just given you a whistle stop, a very brief tour of our 5 building blocks of an inclusive club. Just a little reminder for you. The first one, visible and proactive leadership. Are we making sure that our leaders are taking accountability and leading our work on ED&I so that we can go away and do it ourselves? The second one, robust data and insights. Data, that quantitative bit, are we getting the data about representation? And insights, the qualitative bit, are we learning about people's experiences? The third, inclusive policies and processes. They're super important because they make it clear what is acceptable and what is unacceptable for everybody who represents our club. But we need to make sure that we look at them through the lens of inclusion so that they apply to all of our diverse communities equally. The fourth one, ongoing learning and awareness raising. Are we always striving to educate ourselves on what is a very, very complex area of our work? The more we educate ourselves, the more we educate each other, the more it becomes part of business as usual and something that we all do as a part of our roles. And the fifth one is communicating and celebrating our inclusion work. Let's shout about it from the top of the stadium. Let's shout about it through our socials, through our website, at meetings, at conferences. We want to be proud of the work that we are doing. So we have come to the end of our workshop. And I've got one question that I want you to think about as we go away from the session today. We've got a poll that we're going to ask you to take part in. And once again, Ecem is going to run this for us. And we've got 5 statements that we want you to think about. Each of the statements applies to one of those 5 building blocks. And you will be asked on a scale of 1 to 5 to say how much you think that statement applies to your club. 1 will mean that we're right at the beginning of that part of our journey, or 5 will mean that we've absolutely got that, in the bag. We're very, very confident about that area. So the first statement will be this: our club leadership demonstrates a visible commitment to equality, diversity, and inclusion. 1 being, we haven't started that work with our leadership team yet. 5 being, we talk about this all day, every day. It's part of the leadership agenda. They see it as part of business as usual. The second one: we use robust data and insights to inform our EDI work. So are we confident that the things that we are doing are data driven, are insight driven, or are we just kind of making it up as we go along? The third one: our club policies and processes are inclusive of everyone. So are you always reviewing your policies to think about how they will apply to the different communities across your club? Because the world is changing and people are changing all the time. Fourth, we are committed to equality, diversity, and inclusion learning and awareness raising at our club. So how are we putting together learning and development plans for people across our club? How are we ensuring that in advance of Black History Month, for example, we're upskilling people with anti-racism language and awareness? And the fifth one, we communicate and celebrate our inclusion work. Now, Ecem, am I right in thinking that we might be doing these one by one as statements rather than all 5 together? I'm going to need a little bit of guidance from my colleagues here.
Yes. We are still collecting some, because you have, in the voting, you have to go one by one, and then you submit all the answers at the very end.
Okay.
But I think to go through the responses, it makes more sense to go one by one. So
Fantastic.
Maybe let's give them a few more time.
Give everyone a bit of time. Really think about this. Ask yourself, what do we know about this in our club? Do I think we're probably at the start of this journey, or are we really, really well versed, well prepared, well equipped in this area? Great. Yeah. I'll wait for you, Gaia, to share the responses with us.
Yeah, so important. When you finish the last question, you have to click submit. Otherwise, all your answers won't be shown. So
please press submit. Please press submit.
I just did it myself, and it took a moment to realize I have to click submit. So please submit. Yeah, I see the responses are going up now. So
oh, great. Okay, so that was a useful prompt.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they're going up. Come on, guys, be honest. I was honest in answering.
And I said this
but
at the beginning.
From the results, I can say they are being honest to be.
It's absolutely fine to say you were a number one. It's much better to say we're at the beginning of our journey and we've got a long way to go, rather than saying we've done a lot when actually that isn't the case at all. Let's be honest about where we are with our EDI work. Otherwise, it's never going to have the impact that we want.
Anyway, I think we can close it, but you can keep answering. So on the first question, our club leadership demonstrates a visible commitment to EDI. The average is a perfect 3.
Okay.
So the majority is 38% is free, and then we have 22% 2 and 4, and then 6 and 9% 1 and 5. So
Okay,
it's quite.
that's very positive. Thanks for that.
I suppose, and now I'm discussing it with you because what I was thinking is you go to our website and you find it. We are having this, this clear gender equality initiative that is the EFC Everyone Game. So if you look into our website, you will find it.
Yeah.
And we're doing all these activities and all these webinars. Often now our leaders speak about it among all the different things they have to talk about. That's a little bit different.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean they don't care. It's just that they may be called to comment on other things.
Right.
So,
and this is where, I'm so delighted this session was on the competitive edge, because if we get our leaders to understand that this is also about the competitive edge, then hopefully they should see that this is a business imperative. This isn't a nice to do. This is something we need to take as seriously as all of the rest of our work. So hopefully we're sort of going to see those numbers going up in terms of the leadership commitment. It's there, but we really need to bring it home all the time, don't we?
Yeah. So the second one is we use robust data and insight to inform our ED&I work. Here is 2.5, the average.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, the majority is 2. I guess now, Chris, to be fair again, it's not easy to get good quality data on this, especially if the organization is small, because again, when you feel you're easily identifiable,
yes.
maybe, so.
And there are, sorry, Guy, carry on.
No, it's just also culturally, Greece and Switzerland, people tend to be quite reserved. So, so some people were like, why are you asking me? This is very personal information. So I must say, sometimes maybe it's not the company to be blamed, but it's also.
There's something more cultural. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is such an interesting point, because you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to get good data, and it can take a long time to get to a point where people are confident and comfortable to share what should be anonymous and confidential data. But if you are not making it clear what we will do with your data, what we won't do with your data, and how this will make your experience better, then people won't want to hand it over. Why would I share my data if I don't know where it's going? And if selfishly, I don't know how it's going to make my experience better? Yeah. So yeah, and you're absolutely right. We know that this is, in any country, it's difficult. There's always going to be different opportunities and challenges, but there's things that we can all do to get to a point where we're making it clear to people how we will and won't use those data and insights, because we want to create a game for all. But if we don't know what the game looks like and feels like, then how can we create a game that is for all? But I'm not surprised, Guy, that one's a little bit lower than the leadership one. Thank you for that.
Makes sense. So our policies and processes are inclusive of everyone. Here we have the 3.2.
Great. Okay.
So, yeah, I think large majority, 48% is at 3.
Right.
So
and
I guess we have something, maybe they're not perfect, but we have it. That's
I
what I thought.
I don't believe there's anything, there's such a thing as a perfect policy, because we review them all the time. It is part of good governance that we review everything that we do, whether that's how our players are performing or our workforce is performing, and that includes our policies and processes as well. And we will always need to revise them, and we will always need to update them. But as long as we've got that commitment to considering how they apply to everybody, that's the best thing that we can do. But that's a very strong score. I'm very, very impressed by that.
Yeah, not bad. We are committed to ED&I learning and awareness raising. Here we go to 3.4.
Oh, great.
So maybe there's some understanding that this is important and needs to be a little bit more talked about.
Yeah, if we are going to commit to equality, diversity and inclusion at our club, then we've got to make sure that everybody has the understanding, the confidence to talk about it. We need to create those opportunities. We should be developing learning and development plans for everybody across our workforce. It should be part of their continuous professional development. And we want everybody to feel that they can echo the messaging within the club that we are putting to the outside world. So really, really impressed to see that one at quite a high score as well.
Yeah. And finally, we communicate and celebrate our inclusion work is 3.1. So almost
Great.
there.
And there is always more that we can do. And we need to think about the diversity of the imagery that we use, the language that we use, how we sometimes target certain audiences as well to make sure that they know that they are welcome. Like I said, how we communicate internally and externally. What we say internally might be very different from what we say to our external audiences. We might be a bit more considerate about the information that we want to put out in the public domain and how we put that out. Like the FA of Wales, I thought they'd done a wonderful job with that 2021 to 2026 strategy. It made it really exciting because this work should be exciting, whereas we've probably got a really boring spreadsheet that we might be working from internally. So let's think about the internal and external ways we communicate our work. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for all of that. Like I said, that won't necessarily give you all of the answers. Hopefully it helped to consolidate some of the confidence that you had already. Maybe for some of you, this was the first time you've really had an opportunity to think about these issues, and you've got those 5 building blocks that you can go away and start thinking about within your club environment. Like I said at the beginning, I will make sure that a summary slide deck with all that key information comes out to you. So take that back to your clubs and think about how you start to put those building blocks in place. We'll elaborate on this in more detail in the second session, but please do, I'll make sure you've got my details if you want to get in touch and ask me any questions about any of that at all, or you want just an independent piece of advice. I'm always very happy to have those conversations. But I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'll say on my part, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts this morning.
Thank you, Chris. Is there any question from the audience for Chris? If there is any question, please input it in the Q&A chat. I'll leave a little bit of time. In the meantime, I go back and share again our link to our survey. So now, before going to lunch, you can
it's not quite lunchtime in London, sadly.
That's true. Carolina just put it into the chat, but I also show you the QR code that if it's easier for you to go through it. Please. We are really trying to get as Chris was saying, we need good data to inform our ED&I policy. So that's why we're doing this survey. So we can go out there and provide good data on how many women sit in leadership position, for instance, in European football clubs. And that's how we can really inform our activities. And also these data could help you build your strategy inside your club. So please help us get good quality data. Especially would be very important for you to have men answering this survey. So please do that. If there are no questions on the session, I would like to really thank you, Chris. I think it was a very clear and straight to the point session. I loved your slides. I will copy your slides. I can tell you.
Feel free.
I will use it for some of our sessions, I'm sure. We haven't scheduled yet the next day. During summer, we realize it's not the best moment. So probably somewhere in August when the season kicks off again for most of you. And we will, of course, invite you all. And next week, we will send the follow-up email with all the recording, the presentation, the recap that Chris will do for you. And again, all the surveys link to answer. So
thank you so much for having me today. I really enjoyed it. You probably said I love talking about this stuff, and I'm delighted to see so many people interested in it as well. So thanks everybody.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks to Women in Football. Hebra had to leave us, unfortunately, for this session, but she will be back next time. I wish you a nice Friday and a wonderful weekend. Lisa, do you want to wrap up from your side?
No, I was just saying thank you very much, and thanks, Chris. A bit like you, Gar, I was scribbling lots of notes and look forward to a summary sheet from you.
I'll get it done today. I'll get it done today.
And hopefully everybody has a slightly cooler time in the office next week.
Let's hope for it. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
Take care.
Have a
Take care.
nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.